Hello again. Welcome to the Clean Commercial Transportation Update extra session today. Really great to have you along once again. I'm Bill Van Amberg along with my colleague Alicia Gildy. Our extra edition today focuses on 3 new federal campaign coalitions that we have launched with our industry partners and members across the nation. And these are really very exciting because these are key areas of policy and funding need that have been really underrepresented at the federal level. So there is a National Zero Emission Truck Coalition, just launched this week, National Clean Corridors Campaign Coalition, and a Zero Emission Bus and Innovative Mobility Coalition. So we want to share their goals with you. And then we would like to have full interaction. So as you have questions, please use the question panel. We will try to raise that and bring it into the dialogue. We may call some people out in the attendees in the audience. Or use the chat box if that works best for you. So Alicia, do you want to introduce our hardworking, amazed he's awake, Federal Policy Director to everybody?
Oh, absolutely. And we're so pleased to have our colleague, Kyle Winslow, who is our Federal Policy Director. And I know he's been working so hard, especially this last 2 weeks. Kyle, we're so pleased to have you and really appreciate you spending time and giving us an update on how these campaigns are going and how we can continue to support them. So welcome.
No, thank you. Thank you, Alicia and Bill, for having me.
You want to walk through the campaigns real high level, Kyle, so we can go share with people kind of what our goals are, what our key asks, and then some of the players who have already signed up for this. And we're really thankful for that. We've got a great group of companies really leaning in on this.
Yeah, and I think we have previewed, Bill, I think you previewed the Zero Emission Truck Coalition's launched this week, and so we can start there. I'm really pleased with the folks that we have signed up, the OEMs that we have signed up, in particular, getting together to express support for these 3 different priorities. The point of sale incentive at the federal level, which will be a totally new federal program, and we're still trying to fine tune where in the federal government we're going to be looking to make the most impact there. I think that would be, as we heard on HFIP, that'd be kind of a similar model at the federal level, given the interest around the programs that we've seen at the state level. The other 2 components here are infrastructure for the medium heavy duty vehicle zero emission vehicles that we're trying to support at the vehicle incentive level. So is that taxes, is that other financial incentives, and then research, development, demonstration. So driving the innovation, to drive American competitiveness in these industries, from supply chain to OEM to infrastructure providers. So I think there's a big role for federal government to step up there, specific to increasing the investment in medium heavy duty vehicle innovation. The next slide has a quick snapshot of the folks who have signed on to the coalition so far.
And I will say, Kyle, as we have done some of the initial meetings, you and I on this, we've gotten really positive feedback from committees in Congress, members in Congress, because what they see here is this is a who's who of the heavy truck industry. These are the key OEMs as well as the key new innovators moving into this space. I think that really resonates.
No, definitely, and I think having this unique kind of coalition pulled together really kind of raises the issue with new audience, in that, you know, folks have maybe thought about what incentives we need on the light duty side a little bit more than they thought about what we need maybe on the medium heavy duty vehicle side of the equation. I think that's a growing part of the conversation, and where we want to hopefully step in and help try to inform that debate. So here's a great list of most of the OEMs. I think we showed this a little bit earlier. I can kind of quickly transition to the next 2 campaigns. So we can go to the next slide. Zero Emission Bus and Innovative Mobility Coalition is really focused with the FTA at the Department of Transportation and driving zero emission transit bus deployments, innovation, and new multimodal transit modes and innovation and the demonstration there. So we're obviously monitoring this week the surface transportation bill that directly impacts these programs at FTA. We recommended a 4-fold increase in innovation and deployments for Lono here, We saw a five-fold increase in the House bill that was unveiled last week, and it's being marked up, was just marked up last night. So happy to see that, you know, a great number there for support of zero emission buses. Also on innovation, we consistently, as CALSTART, been working with our partners, transit agencies, bus OEMs, to drive both component technology innovations, but also helping transit agencies integrate these new lower emission vehicles into their fleets. And I think we as recommendations to Congress, have put forth robust recommendations there, and that we're going to continue to fight for as the surface transportation bill moves forward. And then a really big investment that we're looking for out of FTA in innovative mobility modes. So everything from first mile, last mile, to how automated vehicles can play more of a role, to micro mobility and micro transit can play more of a role with traditional bus transit in a clean transit environment. So we can talk a little bit more about the landscape there, but maybe the next slide we have a good representation of the 50 or so, over 50 members that we have across OEMs, suppliers, transit agencies, and other stakeholders. So really excited to be moving forward there, and really busy time for all these guys and girls trying to get priorities highlighted for the Hill. So busy couple weeks, and we'll continue.
Yeah. Hey, so Kyle, we do want to get into kind of your assessment next, and see if we have thoughts from the audience as well. But what is the receptivity that you're seeing, and what are the pathways forward for these different activities in Congress? It seems like Congress is a crazy show to some extent, and yet there seems to be some opportunities, whether it's in a COVID recovery, whether it's in moving forward on big infrastructure bills. What's the general sense in Congress right now?
So it's a really fluid situation, as you'd imagine, but you're definitely right in that there is a concerted effort and a lot of energy right now, especially on the House side, to move forward on infrastructure stimulus, and in particular using the surface transportation bill that is key to some of these program priorities that FTA, Federal Highway, that we're talking about here, using that as a centerpiece for that and building around it potentially very, very quickly to get a bill moving on infrastructure stimulus here in the next 2 weeks. We heard yesterday, I think, that the Speaker of the House wants to move an infrastructure package by July 4th, and that would include the bill that was marked up out of transportation infrastructure last night, and would include other energy pieces, potentially other financing pieces, broadband, even some communications infrastructure pieces around it. So they're looking at a pretty big aggressive effort there, and that will be the first marker on the House side to really move the conversation forward on infrastructure. The Senate is in a little bit of a different place. One committee has already moved forward on federal highway programs as of last summer. Senate banking needs to move forward on FTA programs. That hasn't happened as of yet. And then you have the White House signaling up to $2 trillion infrastructure package that it wants to unveil, and we haven't seen that yet. So there's a lot of different priorities moving forward kind of at the same time, and I think you saw in the House this week a really accelerated timeline for trying to get those priorities in the conversation, and then it's not the end point. I think it's kind of the start of the negotiation, really.
It seems like the markers are going down right now, and now is the time to actually shape what's being formed, whether they will vote on it or take it forward immediately or not. This is the time it seems to be forming. What's moving forward on funding on the bus side in particular? That seems to be moving pretty fast. And then on the corridor side, what's moving there?
Yep. So we saw in the surface transportation bill for FTA funding, LONO was a five-fold increase. So that's really trying to get at the oversubscription of LONO from year to year. So that's somewhere in the, I don't have the exact figure in front of me, but it's over 300 million or so, I think we around there, per year, and focused on zero emission only. That's a new change instead of low and no. There's a big focus on the House side, at least, and just zero emission. So that's a change that we saw. There's a couple amendments that we were tracking too, including the underlying bill said low-no should be used for just non-attainment areas. We saw the House broaden that back out to other areas with zero emission bus targets. Some Buy America changes in there as well. But long story short, we expect a aggressive number for low-no to be supported out of the House as a good starting place for negotiations with Senate Banking. And Senate Banking would be the other committee of jurisdiction that hasn't really moved forward on their low-no recommendations and zero-emission bus recommendations. So we would be, as a coalition now, finishing up some conversations with transportation infrastructure on the House side, and then moving those discussions to banking to make sure they understand our priorities and why that FTA program in particular is really important. And then corridors, we saw we have advocated for a corridor grant, which would be along federally designated highway corridors for alternative fuel infrastructure, building out that infrastructure with a competitive grant administered by Federal Highway. We have been, as a coalition, advocating for a fuel neutral approach, which we saw on the Senate side. So EV infrastructure, hydrogen refueling, and natural gas infrastructure supported. The House took a zero emission approach, but that has since changed, and it was broadened out in an amendment that was adopted that would broaden it to include natural gas and propane refueling in addition to the zero emission options that were covered on the Senate. So long short of it is we think that bodes well for the competitive grant and that they line up on fuels a little bit more nicely now across House and Senate. And I did mention the EPW, Environment Public Works, has moved its corridor bill, the corridor piece in that bill last summer. So that has moved, and those negotiations are a little bit farther along between the two. But we want to still work with Alicia and her team on the Clean Corridor Campaign Coalition to make sure our members' priorities are represented and make sure that both sides of the Hill hear why that competitive grant is really important. And it'll be a new effort through Federal Highway. So we're excited about trying to play a part in that and trying to help at Federal Highway, essentially, as they're standing this up, make sure it's a workable program and that those funds actually get to states and then to folks who are actually going to build out the infrastructure in an effective way.
Hey, Kyle, thank you so much, and it's been such a pleasure working with you on this Corridor Coalition. We're getting some really good questions in from our partners that are tuning in right now, and one in particular from a friend of ours who is a utility here in California, wondering how to participate in the coalition. What's the best way for members or organizations that are interested in getting behind some of these coalitions? How do they participate? How can they sign up?
That's a great question. They can reach out to me. We can make sure you have I can put my contact information in the chat. But we're constantly growing these coalitions, so we have a good list of folks in each so far. But I think we're not looking at that as a static kind of coalition. We want to keep building some consensus among our members and among non-CalSTART members as well. Including utilities, and the utility perspective is really going to be important in all these topics touch on transportation, electrification in some way, whether it's a vehicle, medium heavy duty vehicle incentive for trucks or buses, or the infrastructure to support them. So I think utilities perspectives in particular we've been pushing a concerted effort to get more of those voices in the process. But if folks reach out to either of you, obviously you know where to find me, or to me, I can provide my contact information. We can make sure you're looped in on our kind of individual emails as we get intelligence from the Hill. We try to share that with the coalition, and then we have offline conversations to talk about policy priorities and strategy, but we also have, we're doing monthly webinar web meetings just to kind of group together as a team to debrief on status and next steps. So, and
Casey did put Kyle's contact information in the chat box, so you may have to scroll to find it right now, but it is in there.
Thanks.
And I was also going to add, we're also being asked if one could get a copy of the House Transportation Bill to review, and in particular interest around the whole Buy America provisions for CMAQ. I'm wondering too, maybe you can suggest how we might be able to provide the good recommendations that we're putting forward based on the consensus building that we've been making with coalitions. Again, I think, Kyle, contacting you will be the best way to get that information.
Yeah, that's probably if I'm happy to provide that. We can link you to the quick summary of the bill by the committee, the whole text of the bill, or in particular as it relates to our coalitions, we have kind of little policy briefs for corridors, or as it relates to the federal highway, or buses as an innovative mobility as it relates to FTA. So it depends on kind of what we're talking about, and we're happy to kind of fill you in on how the surface transportation bill how our priorities are shaking out there. So please reach out. That's probably the best way.
Great, thank you so much, Kyle. And just to bring in a voice into our conversation, one of our great participants today, Mark Simon, who's successfully launched the Clean Truck program for the City of New York. Mark, we're so excited to have you as a part of our program today, my friend. So good to see you. If we can hear from you, kind of why do you think incentives for zero-emission trucks are important? How does that really help us drive the market? Maybe you can share from your perspective and experience why incentives are so critically important.
Oh boy, good. Maybe I can.
We hear you.
Can I turn myself on? I can.
No,
Yeah.
you're on, Mark.
Video.
And I'm sure you could turn yourself on too, but that's a whole nother story.
Well, certainly it is definitely still a very critical option. We've been doing clean truck programs here for many a year, and mostly CMAQ money and now some Volkswagen money, and they have been well received, and still, due to the incremental costs associated with trucks right now and trying to build a market, I mean, we really need to offer subsidies for the initial deployments. So, yeah, in an answer, we definitely need that.
Still a tool that's in need. It sounds like
Still a tool, yes.
Yeah, they're on the ground, and I know in the Northeast in particular, we haven't seen as accelerated an uptake in some cases of some of the clean fuels, and including zero emissions. So you think this really needs to continue to be part of the toolkit for sure?
Yeah, without a doubt. We have not had, between the cost, the vehicle availability, we're still very, very much in an infancy when it comes to trucks and acceptance in the fleets. We have some of the large players who are making their moves eventually, like the IKEAs, and we're working on some infrastructure development for trucks, but I think everyone is still, from what I understand, they are moving their programs to where there's incentive money.
Yeah, and we've seen that people vote with their feet, and they put these projects in places where there are the dollars. That's why we thought it was really so critical, and our coalition partners have felt that, to have the standardization of a federal play so that there can be activity all across the nation, not just in a few punctuated places, even though certainly those places are supporting it. Thanks, Mark.
Sure.
Hey, Kyle, one question that has come in has been around, and this is very much, I guess, what we like to say is inside baseball, but it's in the details. But the advanced technology, the ATVM loan up program has been mostly focused on light duty. Do you think that's a play to get that so it can be used more effectively by medium and heavy duty players? Is that one of the tools in play right now at the federal level?
Yeah, it's definitely in play, I'd say. We saw both on the House side and Senate energy authorizing legislation, an effort to broaden out the ATVM loan guarantee program through Department of Energy 2 medium heavy duty vehicles. That bill didn't go anywhere because the Senate bill didn't go anywhere. But also on the House side, there's a companion bill, and this might go somewhere. The House Energy and Commerce Committee has put together a Clean Future Act, it's called. It's been kind of their broad thinking and framework for everything under the sun on energy authorizing legislation this year. And they're going to be wrapping pieces of that into this infrastructure stimulus as well. And beyond that, they're going to be looking at additional ways to move pieces of that bill. And that includes some direct incentives for manufacturing and suppliers of medium heavy duty vehicles through an expansion of ATVM. So we have that in the ZEC coalition. We're thinking through that and other things like climate or green infrastructure banks, the other kind of public financing mechanisms that could support manufacturers directly in production and suppliers directly. But the short answer is, yeah, that does seem like there is some interest in actually making that program a little bit more broadly applicable to the medium heavy duty vehicle space. So.
Yeah, that Clean Future Act is actually kind of interesting because it's starting out as kind of an omnibus draft, but it sounds like, Kyle, they're going to take pieces of that out maybe and put pieces into different bills. Is that kind of how you're reading that? It seems like that's a good place for us to engage.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like with the speaker's announcement yesterday of trying to put together a broader infrastructure package by July 4th. So here in the next 2 weeks, they're going to be building around the typically federal highway FTA focused surface transportation bill with some other pieces from other committees, and that includes energy. So I think manufacturing pieces from ATVM, how some incentives there, some broadening of federal fleet requirements for zero emission vehicles potentially, some other let's see, so there's a couple different rebates for infrastructure for publicly available charging infrastructure, or expanding out of DURA, out of EPA, reauthorizing that and expanding it. Those are all under energy commerce jurisdiction. Those are all things that you can see there's an infrastructure angle there, or at least a stimulus kind of funding angle, where you can see them potentially getting folded into a larger package that moves both in the next 2 weeks. So we don't know what all is going to be in that package, but we would expect that parts of energy commerce's energy legislation and even the select committee on climate change, their legislation might be folded in. So that's why we're taking a broad kind of look, especially through the ZEC coalition, on what could be applicable. What could be a good home, for example, for a point of sale incentive in that conversation.
Great. So again, for our folks joining us today, our attendees and in the audience, if you have questions, the chat box or the question box, really a great way to reach us, and certainly can also open up your mics as that is appropriate. So Kyle, one of the things I think people are wondering about is what's the time frame? It seems like there's like some really fast things happening, and particularly around buses and maybe the corridors. And then it could be fast, but probably a longer play around the zero emission trucks. What's kind of your read on how to give people guidance on this time frame we're working on?
Yeah, it's always kind of hurry up and wait, as you know, we're used to in working with the Hill. But I think on surface transportation pieces for the bus and innovative mobility and corridors, we're expecting the House to move really quickly, and then there to be essentially a pause while Senate banking considers its surface transportation bill, and then there's either formal or informal conferencing negotiations on a bill that can actually muster enough bipartisan support to pass both houses of Congress and not get vetoed. And that process could take a while. And we don't expect it to be wrapped up before the end of the fiscal year when the CERT 5-year FAST Act expires. So we expect maybe a short-term extension. And all throughout that period, we have the bill is still open, even though it's through committees. We still have an opportunity to work with both houses of Congress on floor action, on tweaking things as they're in conference. So I think we want to stay plugged in on that. And that's a long-winded answer to say it will definitely last throughout the fiscal year on surface transportation, even though we're seeing really, really near term 2 weeks here movement on that. And energy side is a little bit unclear. We could see those pieces wrapped into infrastructure packages, like we said, but there's not a clear pathway forward for energy authorizing legislation. And I think, you know, zero emission truck, that process is going to be a longer term process. I think we're trying to think through now, how can we move the ball forward, start the conversation with folks. For example, we're talking about CMAQ funding supports vouchers now at the state level in some states or localities. Can we use that as it's open under surface transportation, being modified by other parties? Can we look at that for at least moving the conversation forward on, you know, should we include more funds there for point of sale? So we're looking at that opportunistically, but not maybe the only place. We want to look at energy authorizing legislation and so on. And as we move forward into next Congress, we don't know what the administration is going to look like, if it will be the same administration. We don't know where the priorities will really lay. So we want to make sure we're talking on a bipartisan basis, both sides of the hill, and with the administration on our priorities, and let them know kind of what we're thinking near term and medium term on these legislative opportunities. So a lot of different committees of jurisdiction, especially related to that zero emission truck one that we've been talking about.
Really good point, Kyle. So I think we are really trying to play a longer game and really raise the issue, because I think a lot of people have not thought about commercial vehicles as much as we would like them to have, but then be ready to go on a short-term game as things come up, and it feels like things are changing daily. One observation that we got as we get ready here, Alicia, to close out is now that we've got the coalitions really up and running, and we've been really working this with the core group who have really signed on and been active in shaping this with us, and we really appreciate our launch partners. Probably we will be sending out in a more broad way to all of our members again, so they can see the opportunities, who's taking part, what the core actions and asks of the campaign are. I saw this from a couple of people in the chat log. So we will make sure that we socialize this back out with you. And now you can see a pretty formed coalition. We would love to have more people join and more companies join, and we will get that socialized. I think particularly all of it, just to make clear, and Lisa, you've shared this, this is the beginning point, not the end point. And we do want now to build out more partners here, and more voices, we have more power.
Yeah, this has been an incredible effort, and bringing all these members to support these important federal campaigns is really critical to really get the incentives out there to help drive the marketplace. So this has been a great opportunity to have this update extra to really get into the discussion and learn a little bit more about these campaigns and really how folks can get involved. So we're looking forward to hearing from you, and definitely want to bring more folks under our tent as we move these efforts forward.
All right. Kyle, thank you so much. I know this is probably, what, your 85th hour this week, so really appreciate you adding one more. And thank you all for joining us for this extra edition of our Clean Commercial Transportation Update for this week. Really pleased to have the dialogue and just be able to share some of the additional work we're trying to do on behalf of the industry now at the federal level with our great action with Kyle and our other representatives in DC. But that's it for now. For Alicia Gildy and the rest of our Clean Commercial Transportation team, I'm Bill Van Amberg. Again, be safe, stay healthy, and let's stay more connected than ever. And as I noted earlier today, let's remember Juneteenth, and of course this weekend, Father's Day. Until then, have a great week. See you next week. Bye.